What's up, Wargamers? Welcome back to World of Wargaming. Welcome back to another episode of Building a Better Table. Today we're going to look at making some walls that could be dungeon walls. I made these to use for a Labyrinth for Demigod, and I made a bunch of them. So we're going to talk about how I did that. Let's first off start by talking about the things that we need. We need some XPS foam. This is about, I think I paid like 17, 18 bucks for an 8-foot by 4-foot piece of it, which was way more than I needed for this project. We need a tongue depressor. This is what I like. We need paint sticks. These work really, really well for this. They come in packs of 10 for like 97 cents at Lowe's. We need a blade, whatever kind of hobby knife you have. We need a ruler. We need some glue sticks. We need the hot glue gun, and we need brushes, paint, and the most important tool, or at least one of the most important tools, a nice rock that's been wrapped in tin foil. So the first thing we need to do is take this and cut it down to size. Now, I highly recommend if you are doing something like a Labyrinth, get a piece of graph paper, map out what you're gonna do. That way you know how much you need and in what sizes. If you're just making a couple, then just go for it. So I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna cut myself out a 6-inch piece. Voila, easy peasy. Next step is going to be to cut the paint stick down to the size that we need. I'm just going to use my handy dandy hobby blade and mark it and cut the piece. Now with these, they can be kind of thick, so I do suggest scoring it all the way around before you try to snap it. Otherwise you'll get really uneven breaks, and they still work, but they don't look as attractive. Once we have our piece cut and our other piece of paint stir stick prepped, we need to go ahead and put some initial scores on these. So I just use the width of the ruler. I like the tongue depressor, the craft stick, for doing this because it will very often usually leave a really good indentation, but won't usually break the top layer of foam. Just go over it a few times and it'll slowly start to give you a really nice indentation. I want to hit both sides. And then we want to start our brick pattern. Again, I'm using pretty much just the width of the ruler here, making sure that we keep them offset. Now, when we go to do the other side, I highly recommend starting with the same sections. That way your lines on the top will match up with the stuff on the sides. And we just want to match up what's going on there. If you have some pieces chip out or flake out, it is not a big deal. It's just free texture that we didn't really have to work for. All right, next step, I'm gonna take this same tongue depressor, and this is optional. You definitely don't have to do this step. But I like to go over my grooves, deepen them up just a little bit, and then I wanna come in at a 45 here and just run down that line. It gives the stones and the bricks a little bit of a beveled edge. Just makes them look a little bit more interesting. You could do it on these as well, but I normally don't. I just do it on the main lines. And I may have to come back and redo these after I put some texture on it, but we'll mess that one up. You know, and mistakes happen. It's not gonna ruin my day. We're just gonna keep on trucking. We gotta remember these blocks in a fantasy world would have been cut by hand, so there's a fair chance that they would not be absolutely immaculately perfect. We're not gonna stress over that. We're not gonna let a 10-second mistake ruin a whole 24-hour day. And we're gonna take Ye Old Rock, and we're just gonna work that thing across the surface. Different directions, all over. Just make sure we get a good texture built up on there so that when we go into this with the dry brush later, we've got some areas that will catch those bristles and leave that paint. We want to make sure we hit every side except the bottom. Don't need to do anything there. I'm also going to need to come back and put my block lines around those edges on the side. No problem. That is too easy. We're just going to take that. I like to kind of go in at the corners there a little bit. Really sell that line of mortar existing right there. Just, yeah. Oh, I still need to. And with all our lovely textures and mortar lines in place, we are ready to take this over to the glue gun station and get it glued down to its base. And here we have it nicely done. Now there's going to be some glue seepage on the bottom there. Don't worry about that. We're going to cover that up with texture. Next step is going to be to get this painted. Now you can use an airbrush for this. You can brush it on. I would not recommend using a rattle can because the propellant in that aerosol can melt the foam. So if you're dead set on using a rattle can, then I would suggest putting a layer of gesso or something similar to that on the foam first to seal it so that it doesn't get melted. And now that that first layer is finally dry, I know it's just been a second for you guys, but it has taken this a couple of hours on my end to get dry. You want to make sure that you're getting into all those nooks and crannies that we made so we don't have any of that pink foam color showing through. And then we're going to go in with, I'm just going to do a couple of layers of dry brush. I'm going to do kind of a light to mid-tone gray and then some white up near the top of everything. But you could go and do as much or as little of that as you want to. You can come in over the top of it with some washes to add a little bit of variation and extra pops of color in it. I'm just going to make this one to match all the other ones that I've already done, and they don't have any of that. And while it, of course, is perfectly acceptable to use your nice hobby model paints for this, I don't recommend it. I'm using just these basic thick body artist acrylics, but the apple barrel or apple crate paints, the craft paints will work just as well. If you're only doing one or two, then maybe go ahead and use the model paints you have. But if you're doing a lot of them, I don't recommend using those because they are expensive and you're going to use a lot of paint here. And just in case you aren't familiar with the process of dry brushing, we just want to get some paint saturated into the tips of our bristles. And then we want a paper towel or a rag, or this is a painting apron, whatever you've got to just knock as much of that paint out of there as we can. And then just go to town. Up, down. I like doing circles on this. I just think it gives me some better light areas and dark areas, a little bit better mixture of those various values and tones. And this would work the same, like you could do your walls brown or like a sandy color. You just swap out the blacks and grays for ochres and umbers and things of that nature. It's all preference. Most of my ruins and stuff like this that I've made is this kind of gray stone, so I'm just following suit there so that I can mix and match these pieces that I've created willy-nilly, how I see fit, when I see fit, and in what ways I see fit. So that's our first layer. Second layer with a slightly lighter gray. And then up to the final color, which is an almost white gray. I don't like using pure white on these because it's a little bit too bright. It kind of sometimes comes off reading like snow. Now, if you're making ruins that are going to be in a snowy climate, like if you're doing something like this for like Frostgrave or something, then maybe go ahead and have a go with just the pure white. But for me, that right there, that's all I need. Want to make sure you hit all the sides, including the top. And then we're ready for our last step, which is just put some texture paste across that board. This is the texture paste that I use. It's perfectly acceptable if you want to buy it, but in my experience, the cost of the ingredients and the amount of effort and time required to make it does not balance out with the size of the container you get when you buy and what they charge you for it. All you need for this is a fine ballast, So your sand, some white Elmer's glue, and then whatever color you want the dirt to be. As it sits over time, you do occasionally need to add a little bit of water to it to loosen it back up, but this stuff keeps forever, and you can make a lot of it for a lot less money than buying pre-made texture paints. So just something to stew on. Anyways, we're gonna smear this across here, and then we're gonna call that piece of wall done. And there we go. Now do be mindful if you have to add some glue or water to bring this stuff back to life. Don't do what I did and add too much, because it'll turn to a gritty soup. It should still dry and work fine, and if it doesn't, I'll just put another layer on it later. But that is my process for how I made my Labyrinth walls for demigods / whatever else I need dungeon walls for. Thanks so much for tuning in, hanging out while we talked about building a better table. I hope you have an absolutely amazing rest of your day.